Church History 1, Lecture 4, Part C. And we had a little snack. We feel good now. All right, let's continue on with monasticism. One of the features of Roman Catholicism of the Middle Ages was monasticism. It began in the 3rd century during the persecutions of the Roman emperors. Many fled to the deserts and other remote places in Egypt, and it was there that the practice of asceticism began. Paul of Alexandria, Egypt, is said to have been the first Christian hermit. Antony was another of the early hermits. Okay, so it should be read. It's all right. Just letting you know what the subject matter is. He sold his riches and shut himself up in a cave for 10 years, fasting excessively, going without sleep, and otherwise abusing and depriving himself in an attempt to overcome inborn sin and evil spirits. So this is dealing with monasticism, asceticism. That's what I was talking about. Being a hermit. The spirit of asceticism grew rapidly. As the churches became increasingly worldly and ignorant of the truth, the ascetics were considered the great men and women of God. Many made pilgrimages to visit the hermits, thinking that they would thus obtain God's blessing. And maybe you've seen a movie where they travel up into the mountains and there's this man, this noble, wise man, old man that lives in the, like a hermit, basically. And then they go up and they speak with this noble, wise man for just a little bit and get these words from God. The ascetic life was promoted by many of the church fathers, including Jerome, Basil, Augustine, and Chrysostom. At first, the ascetics dwelt alone, but over time they formed communities. Pachomius of Egypt is said to have formed the first monastic society. By the time of his death in the middle of the 4th century, there were many monasteries, 3,000 monks, and 27,000 nuns. By the beginning of the 5th century, there were 50,000 monks and many more nuns. The head of the community was called the abbot, or father, and he was obeyed in all matters. Hey, abbot! That's if you're old, you know what that meant. 27,000 nuns. There's a lot more nuns. 9 times as many nuns as monks. And I'm to believe that they were all celibate. Well, maybe so. I don't know. I just wonder. I know that a lot of them were fearful for committing what the Catholic would call a venial sin or a mortal sin. So they would remain celibate with women, but it didn't say anything about sexual activity with men and boys. And so that went on, and that was considered, well, I guess okay. No statement made by the Catholic Church at that time. The practice of asceticism grew ever more intense and strange. They whipped themselves, deprived themselves of sleep for long periods, fasted for extremely long periods, partook of the most inedible food, took vows of silence, stood for days without sitting down, didn't bathe, kept hoods drawn over their faces, sat on top of pillars for months at a time. Oh, sounds like a fun life, huh? You feel called to the monastery? They withdrew from all normal human relationships, taking vows to isolate themselves from their loved ones for the rest of their lives. They submitted themselves to endless vain rituals. Celibacy was exalted over marriage. The female ascetics, the nuns, were said to be married to Christ when they took their vow of celibacy. Eventually, all of the monasteries came under the control of the Pope in Rome. At first, the monasteries were overseen by the bishops of each area, but when the Pope took all authority unto himself, they came, of course, under the control of Rome. All monasteries had to be authorized by Rome and had to submit to the rules drawn up by Rome. The moral condition of the Roman Catholic Church. Well, if I was Catholic, I would not feel the call to be a monk with that type of lifestyle. Though, if it made you more important in God's eyes, that's something to consider. And we as Christians, there's some things in asceticism that I think are good, like fasting. What do you do when you fast? That's a practice really of what they call asceticism. You just kind of do without the pleasures of the flesh. It's probably wise to live a life, not a lot of pleasures of the flesh around you. Live in a simple house. Of course you have to have screaming fast internet, right? And a good cell phone. Popes had mistresses of 15 years of age. Were guilty of incest and sexual perversions of every sort, had innumerable illegitimate children, and were murdered in the very act of adultery by jealous husbands who found them in bed with their wives. Hey, aren't you the Pope? Yes. What a strange thing that would be, huh? The following are just a few of the countless examples that could be given of the immorality and folly of the Pope. So it's not just here and there, just like presidents we've had. Maybe some were a little more immoral than others. This is widespread over. It was consistent. It wasn't like, oh, here and there. The following here are a few. Pope Sergius III had 2 of his predecessors put to death and fathered an illegitimate son. You say, oh, well, I mean, that's common today. Well, he's the Pope. He's supposed to be the example. Pope John XII is described by the Catholic Encyclopedia as a coarse, immoral man whose life was such that the Lateran was spoken of as a brothel. That's what encyclopedia? The Catholic one, wow. John the 23rd made his brother's wife his mistress and had many other immoral relationships with women. He frequently consulted a magician named Abramelin. The Catholic Encyclopedia admits he was utterly worldly minded, ambitious, crafty, unscrupulous, and immoral. He was convicted by the Council of Constance of some 55 crimes, including the murder of his predecessor, Pope Alexander V, also convicted of rape, sodomy, and incest, just to name a few lovely sins. He was deposed from the papacy but retained a position as cardinal, and later became dean of the Sacred College in Rome. Pope Sixtus and look at this inset picture here. You see the children, it looks like at least one child, bowing before who? Well, a pope. See that statue there? Pope Sixtus IV erected a house of prostitution in Rome. That's common for popes, huh? The inmates of which, according to Dr. Jortin, paid His Holiness a weekly tax which amounted sometimes to 20,000 ducats a year, whatever that is. Before he assumed the papacy, Pope Not Very Pius II wrote pornographic literature for a living. Weird, huh? That doesn't make any sense, but maybe it does. Even the Catholic Encyclopedia admits that he freely indulged his passions, that he had 2 illegitimate children. That's a giant statue there. Pope John or somebody, I don't know who it is. Spooky. Pope Not Innocent the Eighth had at least 2 illegitimate children that he raised to positions of authority and wealth in the Catholic Church. He gained the papacy through bribery. He created new ecclesiastical offices and sold them to the highest bidder. Not painting a good picture here, are we? Pope Alexander VI. You can just look at the years. They're kind of like all in a row, huh? You see that? Well, almost all in a row. 1410, 1471, 1484, 1492. Well, he was a vile man. Before he bribed or otherwise his way to the papacy, he had at least 4 illegitimate children, and he made them rich through appointments after he was pope. He made his son Cesare Borgia a cardinal when he was only 18 years old. Cesare was an immoral and violent man who had his brother put to death as well as his sister Lucretia's husband. Alexander held unspeakable orgies in his palace and kept mistresses who were married women. He died appropriately of syphilis, which is not a fun way to die, I will tell you that. Knowing about it, I won't go through the different stages of it. Pope Julius II, in order here too, was another of the drunken, immoral popes of the Dark Ages. He had immoral relations with women that produced at least 3 illegitimate children, and it is said that he had homosexual relations as well. He gained the papacy through bribes. When Luther visited Rome in the late 1400s, he found that it was filled with immorality and blasphemy. Here's Luther. He wasn't the most godly man around, but nonetheless, here's what he said. Instead of a city of prayers and alms, of contrite hearts and holy lives, Rome was filled of mocking hypocrisy, defiant skepticism, jeering impiety, and shameless revelry. If there be a hell, said Luther, Rome is built over it. Famous words. They're in red. Are you Catholic? Online students? I forgot. Next time we'll raise it up. I forgot to raise up the camera. So when we stop, in case I forget. And I'm not sure if that's set right anymore. Is There's little thoughts I have to say it to someone because I'll forget when I go on here. When we get done, we'll do that. So, I said something also that was of importance, but I forgot what it was. Let's move on. Oh yeah, are you a Catholic? Why are you still a Catholic? Look at your history. Just that is enough to have me get out of the system. The Roman Catholic Church of the Dark Ages was incredibly wealthy. The following are some of the sources of this wealth. Where did they get the wealth? Well, the Papal States. From the time of Pope Stephen III in the 8th century, the popes ruled over a large portion of Italy called the Papal States. These were taken by force of arms by Emperor Pepin, the father of Charlemagne, and given to the Pope. He derived great wealth in this manner until 1860, when the Kingdom of Italy was formed and the Pope was left only with Rome. Sad, just Rome. Well, the Papal States in Italy. And later it was only the Vatican City, so it decreased in strength over time. Rome taught that it was the fitting recipient of the tithe. So Papal States, money from them, I guess it didn't say there, but those states were forced to give a certain percentage of their income as a state or a nation to Rome or to the Pope. Also, to get the tithe, and great riches flowed into its coffers in this manner from Catholic lands. In 1376, the British Parliament noted that the taxes paid in England to Rome, oh, maybe this is what it's talking about, okay. The taxes paid in England to Rome amounted to 5 times as much as those levied by the king to the people living there. So let's just say it was 10%, so that's 50%. The Roman Catholic Church acquired enormous wealth from the tithes of kings. These tithes were not based upon the king's individual salary, but rather upon the profit of their kingdom. Especially with like wars, take over another nation, you get their gold. The Roman Catholic Church would take all the assets of those heretics that they tortured and then killed. Well, there a lot of them were poor, yeah, but there were, over time, millions of them. One of the greatest sources of Rome's wealth is from the doctrine of purgatory. This picture here, I believe, is St. Peter's Basilica, or his chair, probably the Basilica too. It's somewhat famous. So this doctrine of purgatory. Rome teaches her citizens that souls of Christians do not directly go to heaven, but go instead to purgatory, and are punished for an undetermined time until their sins were sufficiently expunged. Rome's good news is that these souls can be assisted through the masses purchased by their living loved ones. So you pay money, indulgences I think they're called, and others, to get them out, spring them out of purgatory. Untold billions of dollars have been paid to Rome with the hope that a loved one might escape the horrors of purgatory. What an ingenious thing they devised. They just thought this thing up. The indulgences were promises that the Pope would forgive sins of the living or assist the dead in purgatory, and they were sold to the pitiful and blind people. Well, really anybody. Massive amounts of money were raised by this means for the papacy beginning in the 12th century. The Roman Catholic Church still teaches the doctrine of indulgences. They were recently affirmed by Pope John Paul II. Look at that other picture. How many starving children can you feed with all that gold? Kind of anti-one-world religion, yeah. Rome gained massive wealth through the Inquisition and the Crusades. So she got it through the Papal States, got it through tithes from kings and nations, and also this doctrine of purgatory with indulgences, and here through the Inquisition and the Crusades. She had the power to confiscate all of the wealth and possessions of her victims. Anyone could be condemned to the Inquisition, and they had no legal recourse whatsoever. You're toast. If they call you in, go ahead and get a lawyer. Okay, I messed up here. Is that the end? Okay, I was looking for the next page. All right, well, stop there then. Good, because I was going back to page 1.